Hello, my dear Franken friends, and welcome to Spookyou, your one-stop shop for all things ghastly and ghoulish. I'm your host, Barnabas Vixen. How horrible of you to join us. Curl up, invite your friends, and by all means, make sure those lights are out. That way it's harder to tell what may or may not be lurking around you. There's nothing like a good mystery, am I right? Tonight will feature a singular tale of devilish design curated by those wicked weavers of woe. And without further ado, allow me to pass the reins on over to our vivacious voiceover virtuoso Trey Falco for tonight's sinister story. Please keep all limbs and side covers at all times. We wouldn't want anything to go missing now, would we?
Have you ever been to a funeral for a teenager before? Because I hadn't. Not until Damien died. 2 of my grandparents had died when I was younger, basically one after the other too. Those funerals were sad, sure, but I was young and they were old. It was painful, but it was natural. Damien's funeral was not natural. There's something so profoundly wrong about the death of a 15-year-old. Watching Elizabeth Allen stand up at the front of the room and eulogize her only son felt backwards. I hadn't realized that there were degrees of somberness until Damien's funeral. I thought it was difficult to stomach being in a room of mourners remembering someone who was 86, but Damien... His casket was closed. On one hand, that made me happy. He'd always said open caskets freaked him out. But looking down at it drove home that I'd already seen Damien for the last time. It seems obvious, but that thought felt like being kicked in the chest. I would never see him again. The last time I had, he'd already been dead. And the time before that, I'd abandoned him. The other kids from the school covered his casket with stickers, bands he liked, cartoon characters, all kinds of shit like that. Somehow, I missed the memo, I guess. There were Sharpies too, so you could write a message on it. I'd never seen anything like it, and I still don't know how I feel about it. I think Damien would have liked it, though. Like a fucked up yearbook signing. He might have said something like that, or maybe he wouldn't. But I feel like he would have. There were actually so many people in the funeral home, especially from school, that they had to open up an overflow room. They live-streamed the service to the second room. I didn't cry at the service. I was all out of tears by that point. I just sat there in my itchy black suit, a dad on each side of me, trying to forget where I was. Imagining I was literally anywhere else, rather than sitting in an uncomfortable pew, listening to a preacher who had never spoken to Damien about how God was going to forgive him his sins and let him into the kingdom of heaven or fucking whatever. That made my blood boil. Not because I wanted Damien to go to hell, but because Damien had been a devout atheist for as long as he knew what the word meant. I was always more on the fence about religion, but it felt disrespectful. He knew what he believed, and it wasn't this. I said nothing. I looked across the room to Melissa, flanked by 2 other teens we barely knew. She had a box of tissues on her lap, but she wasn't using them. She must have been all out of tears too. The preacher, whose name I didn't know but who I already hated more than anyone I'd ever met, asked if anyone from the crowd wanted to speak, share a story, a memory. I said nothing, and as soon as I could, I got the fuck out. Damien's cause of death was officially listed as an animal attack. Well, for about a day or two. It didn't take long for word to spread about what the scene where Damien was found looked like. Animals aren't generally going to put your shirt back on after they tear you open. As far as I'm aware, they aren't going to put all your guts in a bag either. Parents were furious, not just Miss Allen either. My dads were pissed. Someone ripped that poor kid apart, and we're just going to assume it's what? A really meticulous badger? I remember Pop saying. I remember that in particular because it was funny, but I couldn't laugh at it. Pop, fired up with righteous anger, saying the words, really meticulous badger, stuck with me. It was hard to get the picture of Damien out of my mind. Melissa was lucky. When she'd caught up with me the day of the search, she hadn't come that close. I think she figured from my reaction that she shouldn't see for herself. What bothered me more than anything else was, well, probably the fact that someone ripped out my friend's internal organs and put them in a duffel bag. But after that, what bothered me second most was his face. I could still see it, clear as day. He looked so calm, so serene. Did he know what was going to happen to him? Was he scared? Maybe he was drugged or asleep. That was the one real point of hope for me. He didn't look aware, so maybe he wasn't conscious. God, I hoped he wasn't conscious. Parker. It took 2 weeks for things to get mostly back to normal for me. I thought it was going to take longer, honestly. I thought the people around me would be more aware of our loss. I thought it'd be something people wouldn't stop talking about, but once Miss Allen left the city, interest in what happened to Damien started to fade. I didn't know it at the time, but the funeral was the last time I'd see Miss Allen. She's still alive, she just moved to Oregon to live with her sister. Parents were still on edge, of course, but when it came to people my age, anyone who wasn't close to Damien seemed to forget about him just as quickly as they'd taken interest. Just another point in the news cycle. And when I say things were mostly back to normal, I mean that if someone were to watch me going about my day, it would look normal. I talked to my parents, I went to school, I did my homework. I went to therapy twice a week with a nice woman named Miss Cody. On the weekend, I slept in. Parker. I groaned into my pillow. I didn't know what Dad wanted, but I really didn't feel like getting up. Melissa is here. With a Herculean effort, I pulled myself away from my soft haven to look at Dad in the doorway. I craned my neck to try and see behind him. She's downstairs. As he leaned on the doorframe, there was a softness to his voice that I didn't quite understand. I didn't know why Melissa had come here I checked the clock. 11 a.m. on a Sunday, but I couldn't imagine it was without a cause. Our friendship had been strained since Damiens' death. I'd heard that a lot of times tragedy can bring people together, but it seemed to have driven a wedge between the two of us. We hadn't walked together since the day Damien was found. I'd texted her once, but she never wrote back, and I wanted to give her space. I changed into actual clothes, not just boxers, and then I walked downstairs. Melissa didn't look herself. Her eyes were shadowed by heavy bags, and her hair was pulled back in a greasy ponytail. She was clearly not wearing makeup, which was unlike her. Hell, even at the funeral, she'd had winged eyeliner. As I stepped off the stairs, I was embraced in a hug I wasn't expecting. I actually stumbled backwards and needed a moment to balance. Melissa isn't particularly heavy, I just didn't see it coming. I hugged back. I felt her shaking gently under my arms as I stood there, not knowing what to do next. Soon, she pulled away and looked up at me. "Do you want to go get ice cream?" I didn't want to go get ice cream, not even a little bit. It wasn't even warm out yet. We were still in that part of a Canadian spring where it feels like winter until noon. I didn't know where she expected to go. Dairy Queen hadn't even opened for this season. "Yeah, I do."
Who are you? You're not allowed to... Barnabas? Something. It's in the booth. Oh God, Barnabas. Barnabas, help me. Barnabas, please, it's coming closer. Barnabas! So sorry you had to hear that, dear listener. While our cleaning crew tackles the remains of that recording booth and our engineers try to resolve any lingering technical issues, let me tell you about one of our fine sponsors, Huxley's Cloning Facility. Let me ask you, listener, are there times in which you wish you had an extra set of hands that you could be in 2 places at once? Well, with a simple and somewhat painful process of DNA extraction, that wish could finally come true. Huxley sports state-of-the-art cloning facilities that are just outside of FDA-approved standards. What does this mean for you? Better, faster, more compliant super clones. Why go to those other guys when you could come by Huxley's? I mean, we're here right now, brewing up another fine narrator. Gestation period is only 2 hours. Hurry and get your clone today before it's too late. Oh, what? Oh, cut that part out. Oh, sorry. Huxley's, because RU is better in every way. Now that our announcer is back in the booth and has finally achieved a normal sense of motor control, back to your story.
My parents made a fourth exception to my grounding. We went for ice cream at a place called Scoobies, which is a wildly stupid name. I didn't know it existed, tucked away in the corner of one of our town's small dying malls. Before going, if you had asked me what the storefront was, I would have said it was a Subway. I think it used to be a Subway. Melissa dug her spoon into a cup of vanilla ice cream, but didn't eat any. She just moved it around like she was going to conduct some sort of ice cream-based science experiment. Eventually, she gave up altogether and set the spoon down. I want to go back to Mrs. Hudson's house. Whatever I had been expecting Melissa to say, it sure as hell wasn't that. I would have set my own ice cream down, but I got a cone, so I just held it next to my face like an idiot. What? I want to go back. She was louder the second time, more confident. That's... I stuttered for a moment, pausing to lick a drop of stray ice cream. You're the one who told me the cops checked it out. Why would we go back there? I didn't realize I was getting flustered until I heard my voice rise. I know, but... She swept her eyes around the ice cream shop, making sure no one was listening. Thankfully, there were no other customers and the clerk had retreated to the back. They only went into her main hallway. She said she wasn't even in the city when it happened and that there's no way she was involved, but if she wasn't home, then how... Could the chains have been replaced? I finished her question with a whisper. I didn't know what Mrs. Hudson's deal was, but clearly she was lying. But wait, they? Yeah, you know, like the cops. Surely the police would double-check her whereabouts. The more I thought about it, the more I realized I was kidding myself if I thought the local PD was going to harass an old woman over the details of her alibi. If they couldn't even be bothered to immediately recognize the case as a murder, what were the odds they'd do a decent job investigating it? I felt a lump form in my throat as I realized that Melissa was right. If the police weren't doing their job, we couldn't just sit by and watch, right? Wait. I straightened up in my seat. How do you even know that? She looked down at her ice cream. It had mostly melted by this point. I asked my mom about it. And she told you? Like, actually told you. I was incredulous. Melissa's mother never did anything for her, let alone something of this magnitude. She could get fired if someone finds out. Well, I thought she could anyway. I didn't really know what cops were and weren't allowed to do. A lot of the time, it seemed like they were allowed to do pretty much whatever they wanted. I guess she thought it would shut me up. She smiled wistfully down at her ice cream soup. That's worth the threat of job loss, right? I shifted uncomfortably in my seat. It was a prime example of a question with no right answer. So, what's the plan? The plan, as Melissa conceived it, was to make a second go at our robbery operation. We'd break into the garage, no backing out this time. Whatever Damien had seen, we'd see. Obviously, it would be harder now, considering the one person with the tools and experience was also the one no longer with us. We'd need to source a new set of bolt cutters, and we'd need to practice with them. And with using a wire hanger to pop the garage door mechanism. When we discussed the plan, we discussed it in terms of successes. We would get the bolt cutters. We would get in. We would figure out what the cops hadn't, and we wouldn't get caught. It quickly became an unspoken rule to not consider what might happen if we failed. In all honesty, it made it harder to plan, but neither of us could bring ourselves to think about the consequences of failure for very long. Step 1 was easy: acquire our tools. I decided to do exactly what Damien had done. Get a duffel bag, fill it with all the shit that I might need. A couple of wire hangers, tape, a spare phone battery pack, gloves for the both of us, cookies, one heavy metal hammer each, the reason for which was left unsaid. The one thing I didn't get was a flashlight. We assumed our phone lights would be enough. Melissa got the bolt cutters. We talked it over and figured that she'd raise less suspicion at the hardware store, right across from the Scoobies, than I would. People get it in their heads that teen girls are more responsible than teen boys for some reason. In my experience, we're about equally terrible. Initially, the plan was to steal the bolt cutters, but they were too big to hide, so she just bought them. We split the cost. Step 2 was harder. We had everything we needed, but if we showed up to Mrs. Hudson's house now, we'd never get into the garage. Neither of us had practice with the bolt cutters, and neither of us had popped open a garage door before. We practiced with the bolt cutters on bike locks from the dollar store. Those we did steal. Sorry, dads. If my allowance was higher, this wouldn't have been a problem. Gradually, we moved up to trying to saw away at a metal fence post in my backyard, one in the corner so I didn't get in shit. It's not a particularly complex task, but I couldn't get the hang of it the way Melissa did. We decided that when the night came, she'd do the cutting. Practicing opening the garage door itself was trickier. My house didn't have a garage, so that was a non-starter. We thought about trying it on Melissa's garage, but her parents had installed one of those video doorbells after a bike theft the previous year. It was Melissa's job to make sure that it was charged, so I suggested we put it on the charger while we practiced. Typically, she would charge it during the day since there was less of a risk that they'd need it then. We thought it would look suspicious for her to suddenly change her routine to charging at night, so we abandoned that idea. In the end, we just watched a bunch of people do it on YouTube until we were mostly confident we were able to pull it off. We set a date to do it. 3 a.m., the morning of March 14th. It was a Saturday that year. At first, the planning had invigorated us. The first thing since Damien died that we could throw ourselves into. I didn't say anything to Melissa, but in the week leading up to it, I felt my confidence waning. Walking into school Friday morning, I felt like a death row prisoner a day from execution. The sights and sounds of the hallways dulled around me. I tried to take them in, appreciate them, hope that this wouldn't be the last time that I saw them, but I couldn't process them over my heart beating in my ears. Part of me thought it was funny that I was desperately longing to see high school again. A larger part didn't. In French class, I stared at Damien's seat. No one else had been moved there. Madame Martin didn't even bother trying to shame me into paying attention anymore. I was sure I'd be back in her class next semester, assuming I came back at all. Melissa and I walked home together after school. I was surprised how chatty she was. She'd been working on an art project that she hadn't finished yet, but she wanted to tell me all about it. It was some sort of sculpture, but painted like an Aboriginal dot painting instead of solid colors. I couldn't really picture it, but I was glad to listen. When we got to the end of her driveway, Melissa gave me a quick hug and whispered in my ear, "See you at 3." She bounded into the house. Clearly, she was doing better than I was. I went to bed early that night, leaving dinner half finished on the table. I told my parents that I'd been feeling ill all day. I wasn't the best liar, more talented at lying by omission than lying outright. So it helped that I actually had felt ill all day, just not for the reason they might have assumed. My alarm set for 2:30 a.m., I crawled into bed. The duffel bag filled with all the supplies I'd need was tucked neatly underneath, ready to go as soon as I was. I tossed and turned from side to side for a bit before giving up and lying on my back, and I stared up at the plastic stars. 1, 2, 3. I got to 146 before I fell asleep.
Welcome back, my darling deviants. Well, tell me, did you enjoy that twisted tale? Of course you did. I knew you had that air about you, that hunger for the horrific and the macabre. So, did we spook you? If not, then file a complaint with our complaint department detailing all accounts of non-spookiness you found in this video, and we'll get back to you in 2 to 3 millennia. give or take a business eon or two. However, if you've enjoyed what you've just heard this evening, then make sure you leave a like on this video and annihilate that subscribe button. Such a small act of obedience is exactly what we need to put the food on the table around here. There's only so many days we can have refried kidney and toe jam hash before I'm absolutely sick of it. Spoiler alert, that ship sailed long ago. Now, I must bid you adieu. I've many things to take care of, and this outro is eating into my day off. Run along now. Have no fear, we'll be here every Tuesday and Thursday to bring you another terrible tale. Go forth, my ghastly gang, and stay spooky.